I never thought my life would turn out this way. Looking back, maybe I should have seen the signs, but love has a way of blinding you, doesn't it? Ethan mused quietly. The words barely above a whisper, yet heavy with the weight of everything he had lost. The cafe was quiet, its warm, dim lighting offering a peaceful respite from the bustling street outside. He sat in the corner, staring out the window at the flickering lights of the city. The world seemed so far away, as if he were watching it from behind glass, disconnected from the life he once had. A steaming cup of coffee sat in front of him, untouched. He had ordered it out of habit, the same way he had done every week for the past month. But today even the aroma of fresh brew couldn't ease the gnawing emptiness in his chest. His fingers traced the rim of the cup, his thoughts far away. The life he had built with Amelia was supposed to be a dream, a perfect idealized existence. But now, sitting here alone, Ethan could see it for what it really was. A beautiful lie. He had always imagined that he would end up with someone who truly understood him, someone who would walk beside him as an equal, sharing in the highs and lows. But with Amelia it had been different. She had swept him off his feet, drawing him into a whirlwind of luxury, excitement and passion. She was everything he had ever wanted at the time. Beautiful, confident, ambitious. He'd been so enamored by her that he never questioned the foundation of their relationship. At first it had been perfect, or at least it seemed that way. Amelia had a way of making everything feel extraordinary, as if they were the only two people who mattered. Her presence filled every room they walked into, her laughter contagious, her smile a beacon that made Ethan believe he was truly special. He had fallen so deeply in love that he didn't notice the cracks forming beneath the surface. Now, as he sat in the quiet solitude of this cafe, Ethan couldn't escape the overwhelming wave of realization. He had been blind to her true nature, to the shallow desires that had driven her all along. The woman he had loved didn't love him in return, she had loved what he could provide: wealth, status, security. He had been nothing more than a pawn in her carefully constructed game. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze turning to the small window where the light from the street lamps cast long shadows. The world outside seemed vibrant, yet it felt like he was staring at a different reality. His reality, however, was one filled with memories, broken promises, and a love that had ultimately betrayed him. He closed his eyes for a moment, the memories rushing back like a flood, the way Amelia would smile when she'd show him yet another expensive purchase, the gleam in her eye when she talked about the future she envisioned, one that had always involved her and her desires. He had ignored it all, blinded by the affection he thought he was receiving, not realizing that love was never the currency that truly mattered to her. A sigh escaped him, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of everything he had been through. The pain of it all, the betrayal, the lies, the broken trust, was still fresh, like an open wound. But in the quiet of the cafe there was a strange sense of peace, too. This wasn't the life he had dreamed of, but maybe, just maybe, it was the one he needed. Ethan took a deep breath and forced himself to focus. He couldn't keep dwelling on the past, the only way forward was through it. He had to move on, to find himself again, but it was hard, so damn hard. His eyes drifted once more to the door, watching as people entered and left, each of them wrapped up in their own little worlds. He wondered if anyone had ever been through what he had. If anyone had loved so blindly, so deeply, only to find that their love had been taken for granted. It wasn't just Amelia's fault. He had let himself be swept away by her promises, by her charm, by the allure of the life she promised. But now, looking back, Ethan realized that he had allowed himself to be blinded by the glitz and glamour of it all. As he stared at the reflection of the city in the glass, a voice inside him whispered, "I will not be defined by this, I will rise above it. I have to." And with that thought, a new resolve began to form in his chest. Maybe the future wasn't as bleak as he had once thought. Maybe it was time for him to start over. But first, he needed to confront the past. Ethan never believed in love at first sight. But when he met Amelia at a charity gala, everything shifted. It wasn't the typical event Ethan would have attended. He preferred quiet nights and intimate gatherings. But something drew him to that grand ballroom, something he couldn't quite explain. And there, amidst a sea of glamorous people, was Amelia. She was radiant, commanding the attention of everyone in the room without trying. Her laughter was like music, her smile contagious, and her aura magnetic. Amelia had a way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room, a gift that made her unforgettable. Ethan, usually shy and reserved, couldn't help but be captivated by her presence. There was something in her eyes, a mix of confidence and mystery, that made him want to be near her, to protect her, to be the man she could depend on. Their conversation began with simple pleasantries, talking about the event, about the causes they were supporting, but it quickly deepened. Amelia spoke with such passion, her words flowing effortlessly, making Ethan feel as if they were the only two people in the room. She was different from anyone he had met before, smart, ambitious, and undeniably charming. Her presence was magnetic, and Ethan found himself inexplicably drawn to her. He didn't even realize how much time had passed until the event began to wind down. As they parted ways that evening, Amelia gave him a lingering smile, one that left Ethan with a rush of excitement and a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. It was as if he had found someone he didn't even know he had been searching for. Their connection felt fated, like something out of a dream. Their relationship unfolded like a whirlwind. What started as a few casual dates quickly turned into something deeper. Ethan was swept up in Amelia's world. The glamorous dinners, the lavish vacations, the dazzling events that made everyone stop and stare. To the outside world they were the perfect couple. Amelia, with her stunning beauty and effortless elegance, and Ethan with his quiet charm and steady presence. They looked like a match made in heaven, and for a while it felt that way too. Ethan was completely enamored. He found himself wrapped up in her ambition, captivated by her drive and determination. She had big dreams and she wanted Ethan to be a part of them. Together they made plans for the future, building a life of luxury and success. Ethan loved the way Amelia made him feel. Alive, important, and like he could be a part of something bigger than himself. They traveled to exotic places, dined in Michelin-starred restaurants, and lived a life that others only fantasized about. But even as their love blossomed, Ethan began to notice things, small things at first, that made him question the foundation of their relationship. Amelia had a constant need for more wealth, more status, more recognition. Her conversations often revolved around the latest luxury item she had to have, or the next social event they had to attend. She always spoke of climbing the social ladder, of making connections that would propel them further into the world of the rich and famous. Ethan didn't mind at first. He was just happy to be by her side, enjoying the life they were building together. Yet over time, the cracks in their relationship began to show. It wasn't just that Amelia enjoyed the finer things in life. It was that she seemed to require them. It was as if her love for Ethan, her affection, her attention was conditional on the things he could provide. How many expensive dinners they could enjoy, how many designer clothes he could afford, how many high-profile events they could attend. Slowly, Ethan began to realize that the love she offered seemed to be wrapped up in the things he could give her, not just in who he was. The small signs that had once seemed insignificant began to gnaw at him. Amelia's need for wealth and status wasn't just a quirk. It was a driving force in her life. Ethan couldn't ignore it anymore. The more he gave, the more she wanted, and every time he provided, it felt like her affection grew colder, less genuine. What started as a dream of love began to feel more like a transaction, and Ethan found himself questioning whether he was truly loved for who he was, or whether he was just another piece of the puzzle in her pursuit of perfection. Despite these doubts, Ethan couldn't bring himself to face the reality. He was still in love with her. Still hoping that maybe, just maybe, the person he had fallen for was still there beneath the surface. But the cracks were widening, and the dream of their love was starting to feel less like a fairy tale, and more like a carefully constructed illusion. Ethan had completely immersed himself in the life he thought was his dream. He was wrapped up in the perfection of it all, convinced that this was the love he had been waiting for. Amelia's charm made it easy to ignore the small whispers of doubt. They were a picture-perfect couple, the glamorous duo that everyone envied. Their weekends were filled with private jets and five-star resorts, while their nights sparkled with champagne toasts in the trendiest clubs. Ethan felt like he was living in a fairy tale, a constant whirlwind of luxury, affection, and admiration. They moved into a sleek, modern apartment that screamed sophistication, an entire floor of marble, glass, and designer furniture. The place looked like something straight out of a magazine. Every item inside was carefully selected for its brand and value. Ethan's modest apartment back home seemed like a distant memory now. It was clear that Amelia lived in a world where status was everything, and Ethan had willingly entered it, caught up in the allure of her beauty. To Ethan, everything seemed right. The dinners, the vacations, the late-night conversations over expensive wine. It was as if he was living the life he had always dreamed of. In his mind, it was love, and love, he believed, meant sacrifice. He'd sacrifice his time, his money, and his dreams if it meant Amelia would be happy. But what he didn't know was that happiness for her wasn't about love. It was about having more things, more experiences, more recognition, And Ethan was just another part of her collection. The moment of doubt. One evening, after a long day at work, Ethan came home early, hoping to surprise Amelia with a quiet evening. But when he walked through the door, his heart sank. The living room was a chaotic mess. Shopping bags were scattered across the floor, and unopened credit card statements were stacked high on the coffee table. Amelia was sitting amidst the clutter, excitedly showing him yet another pair of designer shoes she had just bought. Her face lit up as she eagerly told him about the sales and the latest trends, but as Ethan watched her, a strange unease settled in his chest. He smiled politely, nodding along to her excited chatter, but his eyes kept drifting toward the credit card bill in front of him. The numbers jumped off the page, each one more staggering than the last. The total was more than he had ever spent in an entire year. Amelia was oblivious to his growing discomfort. She went on about how they needed this and that, how the latest fashion was essential to their image, but to Ethan, the reality hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even about them. This was about her, her needs, her desires, her image. She didn't want love. She wanted things. And Ethan had become a tool to provide them. As he stared at the bills, a chill ran through him. He had ignored the signs for so long, but now they were impossible to overlook. The life they were living was an illusion. The relationship, the love, none of it felt real. It wasn't love that had brought them here, it was her obsession with having everything. And the more he gave, the emptier he felt inside. Ethan felt trapped. The luxurious apartment, the designer clothes, the sparkling jewelry. None of it could fill the hollow space that was growing inside him. In that moment, he knew the truth. What he had with Amelia wasn't love, it was suffocating dependency. And it was slowly draining him dry. It was a single phone call that shattered everything. Ethan had come home early again, expecting the usual scene of Amelia's latest purchases scattered across the apartment. But this time, something was different. As he walked past the door to their bedroom, he heard Amelia's voice. Clear and confident, talking to someone on the phone. Ethan had met at a few events. A wealthy businessman Ethan had met at a few events. At first Ethan didn't think much of it. Business calls were normal for Amelia, who was always networking, always seeking ways to climb higher. But the words that came through the door were enough to make Ethan's blood run cold. I'll make sure Ethan signs the deal, I just need him to believe it's his idea. Amelia's voice was smooth and calculating. Once I've secured his signature, we'll be set. I can get him to buy the property, and then I'll handle everything. He's blind to it all, he doesn't know I'm using him yet. The words hit Ethan like a slap in the face. His stomach twisted, his chest constricted. He stood frozen, unable to move, his mind racing. He wasn't imagining it. Amelia didn't love him, she had never loved him. She loved what he could provide. His wealth, his connections, his ability to give her more of the life she so desperately craved. The reality was glaringly clear now. She was playing him, using him as a pawn in her game of luxury and status, and he had been too blind, too wrapped up in his own desires to see it. The confrontation, heart pounding, Ethan stormed into the bedroom. Amelia was still on the phone, unaware that her world was about to collapse. He stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the words he had overheard sink in. When she finally noticed him, the confusion in her eyes quickly turned to irritation. "What's wrong, Ethan?" she asked, her tone cold and calculated, though a hint of guilt flickered across her face. His voice trembled with anger and heartbreak. "You're using me, you've been using me the whole time. All this time I thought we had something real, but it was just a game to you, a way to get what you want, isn't it?" Amelia's eyes darted to the phone, her expression shifting for a split second before she placed it down. She looked at him, a tired sigh escaping her lips. "I didn't want you to find out this way, Ethan," she said, her voice laced with a mix of frustration and nonchalance. "But it's true. I stayed with you because you could provide the life I needed. You had what I wanted and I knew how to get it. I thought you understood that." Ethan's heart shattered as her words cut through him. "So all this love, all of it was a lie? I was just a stepping stone?" Amelia shrugged, as if it was no big deal. "You were a means to an end, Ethan. I never promised you anything more than that. But don't worry, you'll be fine. You have everything you need." The harshness of her words echoed in Ethan's mind. She had never cared about him. She had only cared about what she could gain. And now, standing before her, he realized just how deeply he had been deceived. That night, As the city lights outside the window flickered like a distant dream, Amelia packed her bags. Ethan stood by, his heart heavy with the weight of betrayal. She didn't even look back as she left, her exit as swift and impersonal as everything else she had ever done. The woman he had loved, the woman he had given everything for, was gone. And now as he stood in the apartment they had once shared, surrounded by the luxury he had thought would bring him happiness, he realized it was all meaningless. The expensive furniture, the shiny decor, the glamorous life, they were just symbols of a hollow existence. Without love none of it mattered. He had spent so much time building a life filled with things, thinking they would make him whole, but in the end, it was love that mattered most. And love, in this case, had never been real. Ethan sank onto the couch, the weight of the situation crushing him. He had been blind to the truth, chasing a dream that wasn't even his. The emptiness inside him was profound, a void that couldn't be filled by wealth or status. All that remained was the painful realization, he had been nothing more than a pawn in Amelia's game, and now, alone in the silence of his luxurious prison, he was left to pick up the pieces of his broken heart. As the weeks turn into months, Ethan begins to rebuild his life, piece by piece. He immerses himself in his passions, like writing and traveling, things he had put aside for Amelia and her world. Slowly he regains his confidence, no longer weighed down by the facade of a perfect life that wasn't meant for him. He discovers the joy of living for himself, independent, free from expectations, and unburdened by the desire to please anyone else. His heart, once shattered by betrayal, begins to heal. He reconnects with old friends who had faded into the background during his relationship, and makes new connections with people who genuinely care for him. For the first time in a long while he feels truly seen and understood. He realizes that real love isn't built on possessions or appearances, but on trust, understanding, and mutual respect. With every passing day, Ethan grows more at peace with himself. He looks back at his time with Amelia, not with bitterness, but with a newfound clarity. Yes, he had been blind to the truth, but in the process he's learned invaluable lessons about love, trust, and self-worth. He knows now that love should never come with conditions. He's no longer willing to sacrifice his happiness for someone else's idea of what his life should be. Ethan no longer seeks validation through wealth or status. He doesn't care about impressing anyone. He's learned to be content with who he is, flaws and all. There is power in acceptance, and Ethan has found it within himself. One crisp afternoon, while walking through the park, Ethan unexpectedly runs into Amelia. She stands there, looking different, her once radiant beauty now dulled by an emptiness that he can see even from a distance. She looks at him with pleading eyes, her voice shaky as she asks for his forgiveness, offering no excuses, just regret. But Ethan doesn't feel the familiar tug of desire or longing that once pulled him toward her. He stares at her, a mixture of sorrow and strength in his eyes. He's no longer the man who needed her to complete him. With calm, steady words he tells her, "I've forgiven you, Amelia. But I've also learned to let go. What we had is gone. I'm not the man you thought I was anymore. I've found my own way." He turns away from her, his heart no longer heavy with the weight of the past. Amelia's presence no longer holds the power it once did. With one last glance, Ethan walks away. This is the end of their story, no more looking back. As he steps forward into the unknown, he knows that his future is his to shape, his to live, and that the best is yet to come. Ethan's quiet reflection marks the end of his journey. He looks at the world around him, vast, open, and full of possibilities. A soft smile plays on his lips as he thinks to himself, "I never thought my life would turn out this way, but I wouldn't change a thing." Love can blind you, but in the end it's the truth that heals you. And the truth, well, that's something no one can take from you. With that, Ethan walks into his future, confident and whole. The chapter with Amelia has ended, but his story, his real story, has only just begun. Ethan's journey reminds us all that love isn't about possessions or validation. It's about finding ourselves in the truth. If you've ever been blinded by love, take a step back and reflect on what truly matters. It's time to let go of what holds you back and embrace the love that heals, nurtures, and empowers. Remember, you are worthy of a love that doesn't come with strings attached. Start your own journey towards self-discovery today.